All right. Hello and welcome to the Nerdy Birdy. In this webinar series, we're showing you start to finish examples of successful integrations with synthesized vendors and get into the nitty gritty with PSA best practices. It's one thing to get an integration off the ground. It's quite another to see it take flight. We feature guest speakers as they share their knowledge and expertise with us and how it all folds into the synthesized platform. Join us every month, as we explore vendor integrations and best practices from every angle so you can realize the full potential of our platform and get paid for everything that you do.
Woo.
After all, running an MSP is hard enough. This month's Nerdy Birdie is featuring none other than the Nerdy Birdie herself, Ashley Cooper at Gradient MSP. Hello, Ashley.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, thank you. We'll be getting into the nitty-gritty today with ConnectWise Manage and just end-to-end lifecycle management from sales to invoice. So without further ado, I will just introduce myself. If you don't already know of me, my name is Bryan Chapman. I am the manager of partner success. I like to coin myself as a recovering MSP. I worked in the industry now for a good 7+ years, and I work with partners like yourself, MSPs like yourself, each and every day to make their lives easier, get paid for everything that you do. And since we just launched our new alerts module as of 3 to 4 weeks ago, now we can turn on alerts so you can get actionable, timely, and responsive alerts created automatically within your PSA board of choice within your platform. Now, we're taking a quick look into our billing module today, and specifically just agreement best practices with ConnectWise Manage it rather. So Ashley, I'm going to pass it over to you to just introduce yourself, and I'll jump in whenever I can. And then on top of that, if there's any of you that want to jump in, ask any questions, join the chat, get engaged. We'd love to hear from you and answer any of your questions. Ashley, go ahead.
Absolutely. So I ripped off Brian's slide. So yeah, I am also a recovering MSP. I'll go into a little bit about my history in a few minutes, but really what I'm here for is, I am a community and product adoption advocate. I love helping MSPs kind of like see that big picture and support their PSAs. Support their operating processes by using their PSA throughout those journeys. So kind of jumping into what we're going to talk about from this perspective and where I've kind of brought a lot of my expertise over the years is really about how to navigate the various functions within your organization as it relates to what that process should look like from all the way from your sales all the way through to making sure that those costs and profits get into your accounting package. Walking through how the various ConnectWise models support each other, as well as some nomenclature confusion around what is and isn't a bundled agreement and what types of things are needed in order to make sure that that maps properly.
Yeah. So this speaks volumes to everything that we're doing at Gradient MSP, right? Like it speaks volumes to financial and support operational efficiency. And that's where both our billing and alerts module is set out to accomplish, just to make your lives easy. It's already hard enough running your MSP. So, and then with that, yeah, I'm looking forward to learning some more about this process.
So, yes. So to set the stage and give everybody a little bit of backstory as to why I am a little bit passionate about this topic and where this kind of came from. So like I said, I did start at an MSP myself back all the way in 2009. I was responsible for dispatch, help desk, grew into project management. So I was very lucky to be given a lot of autonomy around helping manage those projects and understand what scope creep looks like and how to properly identify what those deliverables are up front. And I'll talk about assumptions a little bit later too, but kind of moved from that role into organically more of an integration specialist role where I was realizing, like, hey, there's several different tools, like Gradient, for example, was one that like I would have loved to have back then, but
Mhm.
trying to figure out how do I connect all of these various different tools into my processes. And that was really where I spent like a good chunk of my time. And that ended up moving me more intrinsically into that that consultancy space where I actually was helping Canadian MSPs primarily, but also kind of across the globe, people helping them understand their PSA processes, making sure their ConnectWise was set up properly. Um, the community aspect of that was huge. So many people would like find those values through user groups and stuff like that, which I also was like became the facilitator of those ConnectWise user groups, kind of delivering value every quarter, talking about different ways that you can use that product. And then I moved over, as a lot of people like to refer to it as, the dark side of the vendor space, where I went to Avic to really help, like people really intuitively understand that products and usage and what are I charging for, and is this an efficiency tool versus a resale item, and whether it's either of those, you still want to be capturing those costs, right? So that was a big topic of discussion that I would have with my clients at Avic, is like, how do I get these products that I'm paying you for onto my agreements so that I can capture those costs and make
Yeah, and
sure that I'm profitable.
it's not even just focus on revenue, like you said. It's a focus on cost of goods sold.
Yeah,
Being able to then map those to GL accounts within your accounting package, so you can make better business decisions. Quite simply, right?
absolutely.
The importance of being able to understand your margins, like and your costs and your revenue and profits and etc. So having
Yeah,
that granularity is super important in scaling your business, quite simply,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. And obviously, like that brought me to Gradient, which is where I'm at now. And I like to joke that I'm literally solving yesterday's problems, because this was my problem back a decade ago. It's still a problem today.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're here to talk to you about, is kind of, that end-to-end journey, really, right? Like, so like how many times, I guess, like at your MSP, you probably had this similar type of situation where like,
Mhm.
what is sales selling and what is service supporting, right? And how is that all kind of coming together?
Absolutely. It was very discombobulated and fractured. We went out and chose the best breed solution out there, which didn't have native integrations with our platforms. So there was just that manual finessing and trying to find further automation through whatever platform. So, which then adds even more costs
Yeah.
to the portfolio. So, yeah, for sure.
And then, yeah, you run into those situations where it's like, oh, we sold something that was like so not right for this environment, or now we're dealing with like the maintenance of this along the way. And it's all that scope creep, like that's kind of one of those
Yeah.
things that a sales engineer early on in that process can be so valuable, right?
Mhm.
Actually, my next slide kind of touches on that a little bit. So this is actually an example of a project scope of work that I would put together at my old MSP when I was consulting for them, to really help them realize, like, documenting those assumptions up front are really what end up uncovering that additional pre-work, right? So like, you're asking why 5 times, you're figuring out what they perceive. So in this scenario, Bonnie would have been the sales manager at my MSP. She wanted to be able to see a report that shows her, what are we selling? Is it being invoiced? Is it profitable? And there's a lot of like obvious, like, yeah, like of course they'd want to know that, right? But they don't necessarily realize that there's a lot of things downstream, and a lot of people downstream don't realize that there's a lot of steps along the way throughout that path that those people would care about. Highlighted one here being the assumptions, right? Like, you can't have what you're looking for if your invoicing methods aren't being set up properly. If you're doing miscellaneous invoices with static amounts, if you're doing credit memos that aren't related to any sort of products or time, you're not going to be able to correlate those costs back. So that was something that I spent a lot of time pointing out to people, like, you need to be making sure that you're considering this journey from the beginning and how it plays into the downstream processes.
Well, especially when it comes down to like time and materials, like yet alone your recurring services. But in this project summary in itself, like maybe you do have like an all you can eat bundle that's recurring on a monthly basis, but outside of scope, project hours aren't included in that. How does that translate onto your invoice, right?
Yeah.
So definitely.
There's a lot that goes into that. And I have an example here of kind of like a lot of people are spending some time going, okay, this is all great and good, but like, what does that then roll into, or what's the outcome of that, right? And so I like to show this slide because it's actually, this is like obviously a beautified version of a workflow that I built. It feels like 100 years ago. But
Can you zoom
really,
in?
right? Like I wish that I could. I feel like, oh no, I can't. But really, I'll just kind of touch on this a little bit, right? Is like that sales process at the top where we're digging into, what is it that we're actually doing? Okay, well, we're presenting this to the customer. What functionally happens inside of our system? Well, they're gonna win that opportunity. Well, does that opportunity have the necessary products on it? If it does, do they need to be purchased? Like if they need to be purchased, what does the admin and finance team need to do at that stage, right? And so by thinking through the functionality that you have in your PSA and thinking through the various different swim lanes of teams that like might be like siloed in on their own jobs, how are we making sure that those products are traveling through that experience so that you're not having to spend all of your time being like, hey, have we received these yet? Hey, did they get added to the agreement yet? Hey, have we invoiced for this yet?
Yeah.
And it just kind of flows, right?
Well, and that you touch on a good point there. Like when we're talking like workflows, it literally does touch multiple personas and teams, and their needs vary. So this is where like going through those change management approval workflows and procurement to invoice, like it's complicated. and I mean, like it seems overwhelming just from looking at this slide, but it's true. It does touch many people, many teams throughout that process. And ultimately, when it comes to provisioning services, this is where like it does go through the process of touching multiple teams, and you want to make sure that everyone is in the know. So you're not necessarily missing out on the opportunity of, and this is where synthesized billing even factors in, just to make sure that you're not leaving any money on the table. So if you have fractured processes, this could lead to you potentially overcharging your clients or potentially leaving lots of money on the table, right? So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that I like to touch on here is that finance, as one of those major organizations, like they've been around for a long time. They're often also the ones that are the most comfortable using their tried and true spreadsheets. They probably have a lot of manipulative, creative ways that they've figured out how to like get things where they want it to be in their accounting package. Some MSPs have figured out a way to kind of make their agreement, invoicing, and GL mapping work together. And some of them don't even realize that they have all of that rich data in their PSA that they can now start to flow through, right? And to the point that I was making earlier, like sales, like if we're looking up here at the sales portion, they're very motivated throughout this whole process to really bring that to completion, because this invoice customer is going to be necessary for them to see like was I profitable in that area, right? So yeah. So I'll just jump over to the next one here. This probably is going to be fairly familiar to a lot of ConnectWise MSPs. This is the ConnectWise lifecycle, kind of the various different areas of a functional organization that they touch. I'm obviously not going to jump into like everything involved in this process. But as I mentioned, I do want to just talk mainly about the functionality of supporting your managed service agreements, and like what does that functionally look like in the product, and how do we focus on the journey that your like the products that you're selling take, from that quote all the way through to the invoice and invoice and invoice and invoice, right? And like we want to see those recurring functionalities. So really around making sure that opportunity all the way through to that invoice process. And if we need to include procurement in that, we get to, and like there's a lot of other things that can go into that too. So yeah, I'll jump into a few of these like structured slides now.
And this just further validates the importance of even having a PSA. If you're like a partner that doesn't even manage your client contracts or agreements within Manage or your PSA, like this is just like the benefiting factor. Having that end-to-end life cycle, having it all in one place is really
Absolutely.
paramount, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, so I chose to kind of start here because like obviously with Gradient, like we are obviously tethered into all of the agreements, but agreements are one of the most important things. They really are a way for us to kind of show you and work back through that sales process and how it all works. But almost every recurring managed service has some sort of overhead cost associated it, right? Like you've got your remote monitoring and management tool licenses, you might have your rack space fees, or you might have like a virtual server that you're supporting, or license fees for products that that you might be selling. And so that's one that I'll use as my example here. But there's a lot of high level value in agreements, right? Like you can tie time to company buckets. That's the most basic use case. But like we said, we really want to be focusing on how we're tracking that profitability.
and something that ConnectWise Manage just does so well. Like this is where the configuration of agreements within Manage is quite honestly bar none. Like there's so much you can do to configure your agreements within Manage. So regardless if you have resell packages,
Yeah.
user bundles, workstation bundles, whatever, or you itemize everything, or you have
Yeah.
a combination of both, like it doesn't matter. Like this is where Manage truly shines from an agreement standpoint. And this is where synthesized billing comes into the fold, because we pull in all active editions, regardless if they're non-billable or billable. So this is where you can not only reconcile that one edition for your service bundle, but all service components that make up that, all of your cost of goods sold.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so valuable. And so then, like agreements are one thing, but then we need to have those additions on there. And this is terminology that's obviously going to be familiar to ConnectWise customers, but if you haven't gotten into them, really just kind of going to touch on what some of those things are right now. So additions on agreements are just products in your product catalog, right? The only thing that really differentiates them are a few of the ways that you define some of those fields. There's a few really important ones that define the way that a product moves through your system. And that's what we'll just touch on right now. So obviously, we've got our product type. That is very important to us. We want to be able to differentiate like whether it's inventory or non-inventory, those are what defines whether, like if you're using QuickBooks, like do they create products in QuickBooks? Is it some sort of other charge, or is it a service? And if it's a service, this is where it would probably be more associated with like converting itself to time and materials type of pieces. But they all play into the bigger picture at the end around like where your COGS, your cost of goods go, and how those assets are being populated in your accounting package. And then we've got category and subcategory, which are pretty self-explanatory, but they have some powerful behind the scenes features as well when you start to use the GL mapping in some creative ways, where it'll let you define which accounts things go to based off of these types of fields. And then it also allows you to just do more granularized reporting as well. Like, for example, we were talking about where the sales team wanted to know how many of a certain type of product they sell. We could then use the categories and subcategories for that as well. And then the product classes is really where I'm going to dig in a little bit, because there's some confusion around product classes, but they're also arguably one of the more important characteristics. You know, we've got some internal ones like our agreements, which we'll be talking about extensively, as well as like bundle and service. And then we've got our purchasing class products for inventory and non-inventory. And I'll just dig into those a little bit. So to start with, our purchasing class products, these are inventory and non-inventory. These are products that you would be keeping on hand or not, right? So like on the inventory side, if you wanted to be able to associate the fact that you need to purchase something versus having it in one of your warehouses or being able to serialize that, that's where that really comes in for the inventory side of things. Whereas on the non-inventory, this is more of like an in and out. You're not actually keeping that kind of stuff in stock, and it's the default class. It's the one that doesn't have as many nuances associated with it. If it's set to non-inventory, you can actually then go ahead and change it to anything else. Any of the other ones, though, as soon as you set them, they're locked. You have to keep them that way. I was having a conversation last week at IT Nation with somebody like this. So I was like, if you have some SQL knowledge, you can probably get creative, but I wouldn't recommend it. You know, it's probably easier to just recreate your products at that point. But more so to our point today, you know, we've got our internal class products, and service is really meant to define any sort of price overrides that you might want when you're having tickets and projects. You know, they allow you to say that they're fixed fee amounts for certain types of work, but is really geared towards having it on like phases and like customizing what that work is. You're not supposed to like sell a service class product. In fact, they're not even like really able to be added to a lot of functionality that way. Whereas on the agreement side of things, this is where we can facilitate a lot of that recurring functionality. Now, recently, just to add some complication here, ConnectWise has made it so that like you are able to add inventory and non-inventory class products to agreements through recurrence. But for convenience here, we're just going to keep this simple and talk about agreement class products, what they are, and then bundle class products and what they are not. So I put an example up here from Reddit fairly recently. You know, people have always assumed that because they want to bundle things on their invoices, that bundle class products are what they're looking for. Bundle class products can't be added to agreements. They're not meant to be. They're meant to be able to help you do group discounts of multiple quantities of items, or they're meant to help you define project plans through scopes of work that can then convert into projects
from the sales quotation process.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times people assume like, hey, why can't I just add these two agreements? But that's not actually the solution. The solution is something else, and I'll touch on that. Like you can see here, it's actually one that has been in existence for a while, but not a lot of people are super familiar with. So the main problem that people are trying to solve when they're hearing that they want to bundle their agreements is that they're saying, oh, you know, I want my invoice to look one way, but I actually want to be able to still articulate like what my cost of goods is and what my profitability is while still being granular. People have assumed that like previously they've needed to use parent-child agreements, creating their own report writer templates. But there is a solution, and we can kind of touch on that right now, which is invoice grouping. Invoice grouping, as like we have here from Kathy from Sierra Pacific, she chimed in. Invoice grouping is ConnectWise's answer to we want to bundle products on agreements, right? So it's really interesting, and I'll show it. I'll jump in and I'll show it, but it's really meant to help you define the order and the structure in which your products are displaying on your invoice. And it'll be easier for me to show it, obviously, but at a high level, you can bucket those costs however you want, and you can make it look on the invoice however you want. And it can be the really cool thing is if you're also using ConnectWise Sell to do your quoting, you can automate this invoice grouping experience from the sell side so that whenever these products come into ConnectWise, they're just automatically added to the agreement, looking the way you want them to look.
Right. You're managing expectations, right? And
Exactly.
when it comes to getting paid, you want to have those line items show exactly as you intended them to show, right? Right from the sales cycle. So that's really important.
Absolutely.
For sure. You get paid
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah. And then the last thing I've alluded to several times, obviously, is the GL mapping. And this is where we're really taking that next step in the operational efficiency to say, hey, we've got all this stuff flowing through. We know what we've sold. We know where we want it to go. We might want it to be different in different scenarios. And this is where the GL mapping is really, really powerful, because we can say, hey, I want everything from my agreement type of an exchange hosting. I want all that revenue to go to this one account in my accounting package. But maybe if there's a product that exists on there that is a software category, like we were mentioning, maybe I want that to go to a different account. Maybe I have a managed software account that I want that to go to. And that's where you can kind of set those things up. So yeah, I can jump into ConnectWise a little bit. Let me just stop sharing while I pull that up. But we can kind of dig into a little bit of what that looks like in Manage.
Nice. So what do you think the use case is right now for parent-child? Would that be for when you have, need to separate additions out per site location, or are there any other use cases, do you think?
I think there are so many use cases for parent-child agreements. One of the really cool things about invoice grouping is that you can actually have it span across parent-child agreements. So if you are doing site-based segmentation, or even if you have like super granular GL mapping where you're saying everything from this agreement type goes here, everything from this agreement type goes here, except when it's this product, you can have those parent-child agreements building that automation into your accounting package for you, while still having those like one-off details involved in the process.
Okay, that's slick. Yeah, I never thought about that.
I'm trying to log into ConnectWise, so just give me uno momento. And there we go. All right. So there is a little bit of slowness on the system right now, so we can just cut those parts out.
I mean, yeah, it's a staging environment, whatever.
It's weird. Live demos.
Yeah. See, it just needed you to authenticate once more. That's
We'll
what it
see.
needed.
I knew I should have just taken screenshots. Okay, here we go.
There you go.
All right, so as I'm going to start at the opportunities, mainly just to kind of show how that product carries its journey. And I meant to come in here and set this up a little bit beforehand, so just forgive me while I also undo some of the other things that I did to redo them. Actually, let's just do this live. Screw it, we'll do it live.
We got time. We're good.
Yeah, we've got perfect time. All right, so I'm just going to create an opportunity here. Get started with demo opportunity for managed services agreement. All right, so we have an opportunity. We can pretend like whatever quoting process we have, pushed this in. Maybe we used it in Cell. Because I don't have a Cell instance, I will just actually create it right from here and have it kind of look the way that it might look once it's pushed over from a quoting tool, right? So for this case, we're going to go and just add a few products. And as we mentioned, the products are just the services that we are quoting and selling to this customer. So in this case, let's assume that this is a quote for a small business that has 20 staff. We're going to be monitoring their networks and being proactive, and we're also going to be doing some downstream IT, streamline IT, co-managed IT kind of scenarios with them. We're going to give them their own ConnectWise instance ticketing system with 2 licenses, and we're going to host that server for them. So those are all recurring services that we would want to make sure that we're charging this customer for, but we also want to make sure that we're capturing the various costs, like our server setup, as well as those licenses cost us money that we're reselling, right? So we'll start by adding the managed service per user model that we're going to be focused on. I wonder if this is my internet or if it's ConnectWise. So anyways. Yes, we'll start by adding this. So we have this IT Nation internal SKU. I have it as the price of $100 per user, and I mentioned 20 users. So I am going to just save that onto this. And I'm going to add another product for the software license. So we're going to offer them 2 software licenses. That price is being rolled up into the all-you-can-eat user agreement. So I don't actually have a cost associated, but I do, a price associated, but I do want to have my cost because that costs us money. So leaving the price empty, leaving the cost with what it costs me. And then as I add that, I'll just add my one more. And this will be our server hosting. So costs us $100 to maintain that server, but it's rolled into their price. So we'll just keep that there the same way. And now we've got our 3 products, our 1 product that has the price that we're charging, and then the 2 products that have our cost. So when you see here on the opportunity, we actually have our revenue and our margin is already being accounted for. Right. I'm not sure why
but that's just from like a recurring service. So obviously your margins aren't going to be that great just because it's an all-you-can-eat time and materials contract,
right? Your time would have to be rolled into that as well, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of time it's super easy to account for time when you're associating it with an agreement because those are just your time entries. But we also want to make sure we're associating the recurring product costs as well. Right. So customer loved the demo. It was sold. We're gonna now win these. This might come through your quote process, like I said, but for now we're just going to pretend like we're doing it from here. So 1, awesome, congrats, they signed their order. If you had any purchasable products on that quote, you would want to convert everything to a sales order. Sales orders are necessary in order to get those products added to your purchasing screen. Because there aren't, and this is just all service-based going to an agreement, we're just going to convert right to an agreement from here for ease. So here's where it's going to tell me, do I want to create a new agreement or do I want to choose an existing one? I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to bring over these products, and I'm just going to set this up quickly here. No end date. We'll start at the beginning of the month. And then it really should give you the other fields that you need to populate there too, but I'm just gonna go ahead and populate these so it doesn't yell at me, and save. So now this agreement's created. So now that was super simple, right? Like the process flew, like when I won that, I went and I created the agreement right from there. If the process that you have internally was that your salespeople aren't the ones that are doing that, that's fine too, because you're by having those agreement class products on that opportunity when it's won, we have this agreement sales screen. Those will automatically push to that screen. So you can have a process where somebody on your team is kind of like coming into this agreement sales screen, notifying that something's won, creating their agreement. Same with invoicing. As soon as it's time, it'll automatically roll into that agreement invoicing screen. For the convenience of this demo, I'm going to actually create an invoice right from this agreement, just so that you can see what that looks like, and we'll talk about the invoice group real quick.
So this invoice is without an invoice group, right? So
right, yes, yeah. So this is what it looks like with just those 3 products on it, without any kind of association. So when I press this invoice button, you'll actually be able to see, this is what the invoice looks like. You can see, oh, how do I make it bigger? There we go. You can see it's got 20 price, 100. Like, people don't like to see this, right? Oh, I accidentally have a price associated with that one. That's part of the recurrence that I have to fix. So let me just quickly fix that. 0. There we go. So now 0, 0, 100. So now let me go back into that invoice. All right, so now this is not what people want to see. Like, they're like, this is the reason why I don't create my agreements like this, because this is not what I want to see. I don't want that. So they'll try to use parent-child. It won't work very well. They'll try to use report writer, and that can work if they have the know-how and the ability and staff. But what I wanted to show was how easy it can be to change that up with the invoice grouping. So you can find invoice grouping. It's kind of like a set it and forget it in some cases, but you can find it in the product catalog and manage.
Of course.
Right.
Where
right
else
here
would it be?
Under invoice group.
There you go.
And I created this invoice group here where I just said, here's the description of it. I wanted to show the sub items. I don't want it to show the price, right? So I can get really creative with this. If I wanted to group parent-child editions, I can. So I'll just show you what it looks like by adding this to that existing agreement. So I'm going to come over to the products tab. And like I said, you can do this like in an automated fashion right from cell. But like everything in ConnectWise, there's 17,000 ways to skin a cat. So we can add it wherever we want. So we're just going to come over here in the invoice itself, and we can manually attach an invoice group to these products right from here. So I'm going to pick this agreement invoice group that I made, save it. It will take a second here. So we can just chat while we're waiting for that. But basically, once that's added, I'll show you how that changes the view of the invoice in ConnectWise.
So we'll still show like the per user agreement, quantity and unit price, correct?
Yeah. So it shows whatever we want in that case, right? So as you can see, like I'm saying show sub items. So it's going to roll up the overall price into this group, and then it will show the sub items below it. So this has been completed. So now let's come back over here. And now when we look at this invoice, if we refresh it, now you can see high level amount. Here's the total. Here's the description that I put in my invoice group. And because I said I wanted to show the sub items, it now breaks that down to say blah, 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 without any ugly pricing and amounts associated. If I didn't want those sub items in there, they didn't have to be. If I wanted to have a bunch of different groupings, like say I wanted to say this 2000 with these, and then this other thing 100 with these, I can do that just as simply as well, just by assigning a different invoice group to a different account. So you can have as many of them layered within there as you want to. You can get super creative with it. This was just a kind of like get your juices flowing, think about the ways that you can really solve for that with this, right? Like, you hear it from like every time we talk to somebody about gradients value props, right? It's like, oh, well, I don't use the additions because it's too complicated to show that what it looks like in my invoice, right?
Yeah, that's true. So this is where like you can truly like the configuration with invoice groupings and agreements and parent-child is where you can truly accommodate any customer exceptions, right? And visualize that however way that they want. Like there's no doubt, like in my MSP days, we did have to make exceptions. And those exceptions came down to, potentially breaking out licenses and whatnot by SKU or by location or yada, 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 list goes on. So it's like, of course, you're going to do whatever you can just to accommodate their needs. But this is where you don't have to have this fractured process. And you can
Exactly.
still have all those cost of goods sold and revenue line items on your agreements without having to finesse it all too much. You're just leveraging that of these invoice groupings, which is fantastic.
Absolutely. And then just to close this off on that GL mapping side, I'll just show you how easy it is to actually see and kind of like trial and error where you want things to go, right? And I spent a lot of time at my MSP getting super creative because our finance team, as finance teams do, have a lot of little one-offs, right? Like they're like, well,
They
except
do.
for if it's for this customer, they have their own bucket. And so
Yeah.
you can literally do anything you want with GL mapping in that way. So that's kind of where we can show that. So first thing you need to do is set the invoice to closed. Once it's closed, your GL mappings tab populates. And this is where you can actually see literally everywhere that things are about to go when you do that batch.
Mhm.
So I can see here that my revenue is going to my managed services account, and my costs are being split up between the managed services account and the managed software account, like as I had shown you here. So if I wanted that to be different, this is where I'm just going to put this back to new so that when we close it again, we'll refresh it. But when we come over into system and we go to setup tables and we look at the GL account setup table, this is where it seems daunting, but if you think about it, if you use if you're a tech and you use your techie brain, like it's kind of like an Active Directory hierarchy, right? So you'd want to have your catch-all that like if there isn't something, this is where I want it to go, and then you can just start getting more and more granular after that, and it'll just find whichever bucket it most specifically fits into, right? So you can see here, if I created this this mapping to say when it's a product on an agreement with the category of software, this is the account I wanted to go to, and I just threw in this is the like COGS, like maybe you have a cost account that you're wanting certain deferred revenue or certain like things to go to that are separate. I'm just going to delete this just so that you can see how when I come back to this agreement or this invoice, sorry, and I close that off, I now have no I now have no account listed for these products, right? So it's super simple for me to be like, oh, I don't have an account for that. Let me pop it over into my GL mapping. And let me say that I want product agreement from the category of software, managed software. And then obviously like you can get really more detailed the more you need to. But now that I've updated that, come back over here and then you can see new, save, closed, save. Now it's going exactly where I want it. So it's super easy to play with. It's just it can be hard to kind of get started. And so I love to recommend that people kind of like just pick an example of an agreement or of an invoice that you want to kind of work through, and then figure out like what is that start to end? What does that look like? Because then you can work backwards from there and figure out, like what are those little steps along the way that can help make this like fully automated, or at least as automated as possible without having to jump into that human effort, right?
Mhm. That's beautiful. Like start to end journey for sure. And doing a little bit of reverse engineering, like you said, would help kind of map exactly what's intended. Going back to that original slide where you had workflows and all that. So
Yeah,
trying to
exactly.
reverse engineer that process for you then to, like you said, see whether there are any opportunities for you to further automate that process and whatnot. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So on the ConnectWise side, like my touch, I want to think about, what does this look like from a gradient perspective as well, but like what are those high level takeaways from like how we can fully operationalize the ConnectWise piece and how that rolls into your existing process, right? So we obviously talked about the individual team's scopes of impact, right? Like if you're thinking
Mhm.
within your own swim lane, you're never going to be thinking about how whatever you're doing along your process needs to feed through to the rest of the teams. Um, and then like we were just talking about, like consider your desired end status, like close the invoice, look at your GL accounts mapping section. Is it going where you want it to go? If not, do you need to add a little bit more granularity in there with additional products,
Mhm.
um, or maybe some parent-child agreements? A lot of times what's been holding you back from that is assuming that like the way that you bundle them isn't really going to work for your use case. So kind of like, like that's takeaway number 3 there is that just because there's a product class in ConnectWise called bundle doesn't necessarily mean that that's the solution to bundling your agreements and that there isn't another way, right? And so, like that takeaway 4 was obviously that that invoice grouping, right? And thinking about how we tie together the problem we're trying to solve with the functionality that's relevant in the system to solve it.
Mhm. Yeah, those are awesome takeaways, and definitely something that all MSPs, no matter how big or small or operationally mature they are, to consider and constantly iterate to further automate that process as much as possible. So huge takeaways. How does this fit into synthesized billing? Well, we're kind of short on time here, but this is where, again, going back to my previous comments, is it doesn't really matter how you set out to configure your agreements within Manage. We're going to pull in all active additions, regardless if they're marked as billable or non-billable. So that way we can then reconcile not only your revenue additions, but also your cost of goods sold. So this is where we're pulling in that PSA count from across all your recurring agreements for your resale stack. And then in turn, we're then pulling and extracting usage from your vendor accounts, either through that of a CSV upload or a direct integration. So that way you can do that review, reconcile, and approve process just to make sure that you have invoice accuracy and you're not leaving any money on the table. Because let's face it, there might be processes from that sales journey where something does go astray and you might not have or you did provision licenses, yet you haven't billed for it. So we don't want you to miss out on the opportunity to build those types of things. So this is where it comes all to fruition within our billing module to make those things happen. So you can truly have granularity into your entire resale stack and your cost of
Absolutely.
goods sold. So I won't touch on that. I'm not going to share anything today, but I would just encourage you to sign up. It's free to register and sync ConnectWise Manage. And once you do, you're in contact with our success team, and we're there to shepherd you and handhold you through that process to, take full advantage of our platform. Now, I'm going to end it here with, well, thanks for attending. Lots of insights and takeaways from Ashley, and hopefully you got some value in that. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Get started today. Our next series is coming in January, so we are just taking a leave of absence for the month of December just because of holidays, and it's already busy enough. It kind of has that ramping up period for all MSPs, and it kind of dies off like right around Christmas time and prior to the New Year's. I think people hibernate for a good 3 to 4 weeks after Christmas. So
Yeah.
hopefully you're gonna have a little bit of a lull, so you can just catch your breath going into the new year. But stay tuned. We're again featuring a Nerdy Birdy series every month So we'd love to hear from you as to what you would like to hear. Maybe it is a deep dive into ConnectWise Manage. Maybe there's other things that you need more clarification on. Maybe it's a deep dive into that of another PSA or a vendor integration. We're pumping out integrations every month, so
Yeah.
stay tuned.